The warship Keithrani Prime burned through the darkness of space, its weapons charging for another devastating strike. Captain Zylax stood at the command center, his scaled face showing no emotion as he watched the enemy fleet approaching on the display screens. "The Vorath ships are within range," reported his weapons officer. "We can destroy their lead vessel in 12 seconds. Zylax was about to give the order when something unexpected appeared on the sensors. A small ship, unlike anything he had ever seen, emerged from what looked like a folding of space itself. It moved between the two fleets, directly into the line of fire. "What is that?" Zylax demanded. "Is it a new Vorath weapon?" "Unknown, Captain. The technology does not match any species in our database. The ship is transmitting on all frequencies, audio only." "Play it." A voice filled the command center. It spoke in perfect Keithrani, which should have been impossible for an unknown species. "This is Ambassador Sarah Chen of the United Earth Alliance. I am requesting an immediate ceasefire. Please respond." Zylax stared at his communication officer. "Earth? I have never heard of such a place." "Neither have we, Captain. The star charts show nothing under that name." On the other side of the potential battlefield, the Vorath commander Threll was having a similar conversation. His massive form, covered in thick armor plates natural to his species, leaned forward to examine the strange ship on his screens. "It claims to be from a species called humans," his second officer reported. "They are requesting we stop our attack." "One small ship wants us to stop a war that has lasted for 300 years, Threll laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "Either they are very brave or very foolish." "Commander, the Keithrani weapons are still charging. They could fire at any moment." "Let them. This unknown ship is in their way. If they destroy it, we lose nothing." But the Keithrani did not fire. Captain Zylax found himself hesitating, something he rarely did in battle. There was something about the situation that made him curious. In 3 centuries of war with the Vorath, nothing new had happened. The same battles, the same deaths, the same hatred passed down through generations. This was different. "Respond to the transmission," Zylax ordered. "Tell them they have 60 seconds to explain themselves before we continue our attack." Ambassador Sarah Chen received the response and smiled slightly. She had studied the Keithrani for weeks through the observation probes humanity had been sending through the galaxy for decades. She knew they valued directness above all else. "Captain Zylax, my name is Sarah Chen. My people have been watching your war for some time. We come from a distant part of the galaxy you have not yet explored. We are not here to fight or to take sides. We are here because we believe this war can end." "The war will end when all Vorath are dead," Zylax replied. "Or when all Keithrani are destroyed," Commander Threll added, having been connected to the same channel. "Human, you waste our time with foolish talk." Sarah had expected this response. Human history was filled with similar conflicts. She remembered studying the wars of Earth, how enemies who had sworn to destroy each other eventually found peace. It was never easy, but it was always possible. "May I ask both of you a question?" Sarah said. "Do you remember why this war started?" There was silence on both channels. Zylax searched his memory. He knew there were records, ancient texts that described the first conflict, but the details had been lost to most of his people. What remained was only hatred, taught from birth. "The Vorath attacked our colony on Melrix 4, Zylax finally said, though his voice held uncertainty. "Lies," Threll roared. "The Keithrani struck first at our mining station near the Void Nebula." "Interesting," Sarah said calmly. "Our research shows that neither of these events happened first. The original conflict began with a misunderstanding over a shared water source on the planet you both call Neutral 7. A Keithrani survey team and a Vorath exploration group both landed on the same day. Neither species had developed reliable translation technology at that time. Fear led to violence, and 3 individuals died. Both sides then called for revenge. The silence that followed was heavy. Xylax looked at his officers, who avoided his gaze. Could it be true? Had 300 years of war begun over something so simple? "You expect us to believe that?" Threll asked, but his voice had lost some of its anger. "I expect nothing," Sarah replied, "but I can show you the evidence. Our probes recorded much of your history as neutral observers. We have no reason to lie to you. We gain nothing from your continued war or from its end. We are simply here because we believe intelligent beings should not destroy each other over ancient misunderstandings." Captain Xylax made a decision that went against everything he had been taught. "Stand down weapons," he ordered. His officers stared at him in shock. "Captain, you cannot be serious." "I said stand down. I want to hear what this human has to say." On the Voreth ship, Commander Threll was facing his own moment of decision. His entire life had been devoted to fighting the Keithrani. His father had died in battle against them, as had his grandfather. To stop now, even for a moment, felt like betrayal. But he was also tired. So very tired of watching young Voreth die for a cause that seemed to have no end. If there was even a small chance that this strange human spoke the truth, did he not owe it to his people to listen? "Hold fire," Threll commanded, "but keep weapons ready. If this is a trick, we will respond with everything we have." Sarah Chen let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. This was further than the first 3 attempts had gotten. The previous human ambassadors had been destroyed before they could speak a single word. The conflict between the Keithrani and Voreth was considered one of the most dangerous in the known galaxy. Many on Earth had argued it was not worth the risk to intervene. But Sarah believed in something fundamental about intelligent life. Given the right conditions, given enough information and patience, beings could choose cooperation over conflict. It was not guaranteed, but it was possible. And humanity had learned this lesson through its own painful history. "I propose a meeting," Sarah said. "Neutral ground. I will transmit coordinates to a space station in unclaimed territory. Both sides send one representative unarmed. I will act as mediator. If you decide to continue the war after hearing each other out, I will leave and never return. But if there is any chance for peace, will you not at least try?" Xylax and Threll considered this proposal. Neither trusted the other. Neither trusted this human. But both were curious and both were exhausted by endless war. Sometimes that is enough to begin something new. "I will come," Xylax said. After a long pause, Threll responded, "As will I." Sarah Chen nodded to herself. The hard part was just beginning, but she had taken the first step. She sent the coordinates and prepared for what she knew would be the most difficult negotiation of her life. The fate of 2 species, and perhaps many more, depended on what happened next. The 3 ships turned away from battle and headed toward a small station floating in the darkness between stars. For the first time in 300 years, Keithrani and Voreth traveled in the same direction without trying to destroy each other. It was not peace, not yet, but it was a start. Sarah spent the travel time reviewing everything humanity knew about both species. The Keithrani were reptilian, cold-blooded in the biological sense, but known for fierce loyalty to their families and clans. They valued honor and directness. Lies were considered the greatest crime in their society. The Voreth were armored beings, evolved from creatures that lived in hostile environments. They were suspicious by nature, slow to trust, but deeply loyal once that trust was earned. They respected strength but also wisdom. On paper, the 2 species should have been able to coexist. Their needs were different enough that they could share the galaxy without competing for the same resources. But history had taken them down a different path, and now Sarah had to find a way to change that path. The station she had chosen was an old trading post, abandoned when the war made this region too dangerous for commerce. Humanity had secretly restored it for this purpose, filling it with neutral meeting spaces and communication equipment. There were no weapons on the station, and Sarah had made sure both sides could verify this before arriving. She docked her ship and went to prepare the meeting room. 2 chairs, one sized for each species, faced each other across a round table. Sarah would sit between them, an equal distance from each. Small details mattered in negotiations like this. Any sign of favoritism could destroy the fragile trust she was trying to build. When Captain Zylax and Commander Threll arrived, they were escorted by their guards to the meeting room doors. As agreed, the guards remained outside while the 3 leaders entered alone. Zylax studied the Vorath commander with ancient hatred in his eyes. Threll returned the gaze with equal intensity. Sarah could feel the tension in the room, thick enough to cut with a blade. "Please sit," she said, keeping her voice calm and neutral. "We have much to discuss." Neither moved at first. Then Zylax stepped forward and took his seat. Threll followed a moment later. They sat across from each other, enemies at a table with a single human between them. "Before we begin," Sarah said, "I want to thank you both for taking this risk. I know it was not easy. I know your people may see this as weakness or betrayal, but I believe that seeking understanding takes more courage than continuing to fight." "We are not here because we are weak," Zylax said sharply. "I am here because I want the truth." "As am I," Threll agreed. "Show us this evidence you claim to have." Sarah had expected this. She activated the holographic display built into the table, and images began to appear in the air above them. Records, translations, and most importantly, actual footage captured by human observation probes centuries ago. The 2 leaders watched in silence as history unfolded before them. They saw the first meeting on Neutral 7, the confusion, the fear, and the violence that followed. They saw how each side had interpreted the event differently, how misunderstandings had grown into accusations, how small conflicts had built into full-scale war. "This cannot be real," Zylax whispered. "Our histories say." "Histories are written by those who survive," Sarah said gently, "and they are often shaped by those who benefit from conflict. I am not saying your ancestors lied deliberately, but fear and anger can change how we remember things. What started as a tragic accident became a story of unprovoked aggression, told differently by each side." Threll was staring at the images, his armored body very still. "My father told me the Keithrani were evil, that they attacked us without reason, that they would destroy all Vorath if given the chance." "And my teachers told me the same about your people," Zylax admitted. "Generation after generation, the hatred was passed down. We never questioned it." Sarah let them sit with this realization. She knew from human experience how difficult it was to learn that everything you believed might be wrong. It took time to process, time to grieve, and time to find a new way forward. "I am not asking you to forget the past," she said. "The deaths that have occurred are real. The pain your people have suffered is real, but the future does not have to be determined by the past. You can choose a different path." "How?" Threll asked. "Even if we believe this evidence, even if we accept that the war began through misunderstanding, too much blood has been spilled. Our people will not accept peace. They have been taught to hate." "They were taught to hate," Sarah agreed. "And they can be taught something else. It will not happen overnight. It may take generations. But it starts here with the 2 of you making a different choice." Zylax looked at his ancient enemy. For the first time he tried to see Threll not as a monster but as another being, shaped by the same forces that had shaped him. It was not easy. The hatred was deep, carved into his very identity, but beneath it he found something unexpected: curiosity, and perhaps, just perhaps, hope. "What would you have us do, human?" Zylax asked. Sarah smiled. "First, a ceasefire. No attacks from either side while we negotiate. Second, an exchange of information. Your people need to see what I have shown you today. Third, and most importantly, communication. You need to actually talk to each other. Not through weapons, not through threats, but through words." You make it sound simple, Threll said. It is simple, Sarah replied. It is just not easy. There is a difference. Ending a war is one of the hardest things any civilization can do, but it is possible. My own people have done it many times throughout our history. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once before we learned how to choose cooperation over conflict. The meeting continued for hours. They discussed practical matters like ceasefire terms, communication protocols, and how to present this information to their respective governments. There were arguments, moments of anger, and times when it seemed like the whole effort would collapse. But they kept talking, and slowly, painfully, they began to find common ground. Not friendship, not yet, but respect, perhaps. A recognition that the being sitting across the table was not so different from themselves. When they finally emerged from the meeting room, both leaders looked exhausted but different somehow. Their guards noticed the change immediately but said nothing. They had learned long ago not to question their commanders. We will implement the ceasefire immediately, Xylax told Sarah, and I will speak to my government about what we have learned. As will I, Threll added. But I warn you, human, this may not work. The forces that want this war to continue are powerful. They will resist. I know, Sarah said. Change always faces resistance, but you have taken the first step, and that is what matters most. The two leaders looked at each other one final time before leaving. There was still hatred in their eyes, but there was something else now too. A question, perhaps, a wondering about what might be possible if they chose a different path. Sarah watched them go, feeling the weight of what had just happened. This was only the beginning. The real work would take years, maybe decades, but for the first time in 3 centuries, there was hope. She returned to her ship and prepared her report for Earth. The United Earth Alliance needed to know that Phase 1 was complete. The next phase would be even more challenging, but humanity was committed to seeing this through. Because if they could help end this war, if they could prove that ancient enemies could become allies, then perhaps they could do the same for other conflicts across the galaxy. Sarah Chen believed in something simple but profound. Intelligent beings, given the right support and information, could choose to be better than their history. It would not always work. Some conflicts were too deep, some hatreds too strong, but it was always worth trying. As her ship left the station, she looked back at the 2 warships departing in opposite directions. For 300 years, those ships would have been trying to destroy each other. Today, they were traveling home to deliver news of peace. It was not guaranteed to succeed, but it was possible, and sometimes possible was enough. The news of the ceasefire spread through both civilizations like a shockwave. Some celebrated, seeing it as the end of centuries of suffering. Others were outraged, viewing it as betrayal of all those who had died in the war. Captain Xylax and Commander Threll found themselves at the center of storms they had not anticipated. Xylax stood before the Keithrani High Council, his scales reflecting the harsh light of the chamber. The 12 council members looked down at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to fury. "You dare suggest we end the war?" demanded Councillor Vrex, the eldest member. "You would dishonor every Keithrani who has died fighting the Vorath." "I would honor them by ensuring no more die for nothing," Xylax replied, keeping his voice steady. "The evidence the humans showed us is real. Our historians have verified it. This war began through misunderstanding, not malice. Even if that is true, the Vorath have killed millions of our people since then. They are our enemies. They will always be our enemies." Xylax took a deep breath. The human ambassador said something that has stayed with me. She said that her own species nearly destroyed itself through war multiple times, but they learned to choose differently. They are now one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, not because they conquered others, but because they cooperated with them. "Cooperation with the Vorath is impossible," another counselor declared. "They are incapable of honor. They are liars and murderers." "They say the same about us," Xylax said quietly. I sat across a table from Commander Threll, and I saw something I did not expect. I saw a being who is tired of this war, who has lost family members just as we have, who wants a future for his people that does not involve endless death. The council fell into uncertain silence. Some members exchanged glances. The idea that the enemy might be something other than pure evil was difficult to accept, but Xylax's words had planted a seed of doubt. Meanwhile, Commander Threll faced similar resistance among his own people. The Voreth Assembly was even more hostile than the Keithrani Council. Voices rose in anger as Threll presented his report. "You would trust a Keithrani's word," shouted General Morax, his armored fists slamming against the table. "They have betrayed every agreement we ever made." "We have betrayed agreements as well," Threll replied. "Both sides have done terrible things, but the question is whether we want to continue this cycle forever or find a way to end it. The only end is victory." "Victory at what cost?" Threll asked. "How many more generations must die? How many more planets must burn? The humans have shown me something I never considered possible, a way forward that does not require the destruction of either species." Ambassador Sarah Chen monitored both proceedings through translation software provided by her ship systems. She knew this would be the hardest phase. Getting the leaders to agree to talk was relatively easy. Convincing entire civilizations to change their minds was much harder. She had prepared for this. Humanity had experience with these situations, both successful and unsuccessful. The key was to provide ongoing support while letting the species involved make their own choices. Forcing peace never worked. It had to be chosen freely. Sarah began implementing Phase 2 of the plan. She arranged for cultural exchanges, starting small. Scientists from both species were invited to a neutral research station to work on projects that had nothing to do with the war. Studying a distant nebula, perhaps, or analyzing the chemical composition of an uninhabited planet. At first, the scientists refused to even be in the same room, but Sarah was patient. She gave them separate workspaces that gradually moved closer together. She introduced collaborative problems that required input from both sides. She celebrated small victories and quietly managed conflicts. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A Keithrani scientist named Solara and a Voreth researcher named Brennock were both working on the same puzzle independently. Neither had made progress in weeks. One day, almost by accident, they ended up looking at each other's notes. "Your approach is wrong," Brennock said gruffly. "You are ignoring the magnetic field variations." Solara bristled at the criticism but looked at the data again. "I ignored them because they seemed random. But you are right, there is a pattern I missed. However, your calculations also have an error. You have not accounted for the thermal expansion of the sensor arrays." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then slowly, they began to work together. Within a day, they had solved the problem that had stumped both of them for months. Sarah watched this interaction from a distance, feeling hope grow in her chest. This was how it started, not with grand gestures or historic treaties, but with small moments of cooperation, with the realization that the other side had something valuable to offer. She reported the progress back to Earth, and more resources were allocated to the effort. Additional neutral stations were established. Trade routes were proposed, allowing both species to access goods they had been denied for centuries. Economic ties began to form, creating incentives for peace that went beyond ideology. But resistance remained strong. On both sides, there were those who benefited from the war. Weapons manufacturers, military leaders whose power depended on conflict, politicians who used fear of the enemy to maintain control. These forces pushed back hard against the peace process. Xylax received death threats from extremist groups within his own species. Threll survived 2 assassination attempts. Sarah herself was targeted, though Earth's advanced technology protected her from the attacks. The turning point came 6 months into the ceasefire. A rogue faction of Keithrani, led by a general who refused to accept peace, launched an unauthorized attack on a Voreth colony. Hundreds died in the initial assault. The galaxy held its breath. This was exactly the kind of incident that could restart the war. Threll was under enormous pressure to respond with force. Many in his government demanded immediate retaliation. Instead, Threll made a choice that shocked everyone. He contacted Captain Xylax directly through the communication channels Sarah had established. "I know you did not order this attack," Threll said. "I have seen the evidence that it was a rogue action. I am giving you the opportunity to deal with this yourself. Show me that the Keithrani government is committed to peace." Xylax was stunned. In 300 years of war, no Voreth commander had ever shown such restraint. The expectation would have been immediate counterattack, escalation, more death. "We will bring the perpetrators to justice," Xylax promised, "and we will compensate the families of those who were killed." True to his word, Xylax personally led the operation to arrest the rogue general. The trial was public, broadcast to both species. For the first time, Voreth saw Keithrani punishing their own for violence against the enemy. It was a powerful message. Sarah used this moment to push for even deeper changes. She proposed joint military patrols of contested regions, with ships from both species working together. She suggested cultural education programs, where young people could learn about the history and values of the other species. Not everyone was convinced. Old hatreds died hard, and there were many who would never accept peace. But the majority began to shift. The war had exhausted both civilizations. The promise of a different future was attractive, even if it seemed strange and uncertain. A year after the initial ceasefire, a formal peace treaty was signed. Captain Xylax and Commander Threll met again at the same station where they had first talked, but this time surrounded by diplomats and officials from both governments. Sarah Chen stood to the side, watching the historic moment. She was proud of what had been accomplished, but she knew the work was far from over. Treaties were just pieces of paper. Real peace required generations of effort. "You have done something remarkable," Xylax told her after the signing. "My people will not forget what you have done for us." "I did not do this alone," Sarah replied. "You and Commander Threll made the hard choices. Your scientists and citizens chose to try something new. I just provided some information and a neutral space. The courage came from you." Threll joined them, his massive form casting a shadow over the smaller beings. "The human is too modest. Without her intervention, we would still be killing each other. Perhaps we would have fought until neither species remained." "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged, "but I believe both your species would have found their way to peace eventually. History tends to move toward cooperation, even if the path is long and painful. Humans have learned this lesson. We hope others can learn it faster than we did." The three of them looked out the station's observation window at the stars. Somewhere out there, two fleets that had spent centuries trying to destroy each other were now learning to work together. It was strange and wonderful and fragile. "What will you do now?" Xylax asked Sarah. "There are other conflicts in the galaxy, other species trapped in cycles of violence. Humanity will continue to offer help where it is wanted. We cannot force peace on anyone, but we can provide tools and support for those who seek it." "A noble purpose," Threll said, "though I suspect it will bring you into danger many times." Sarah smiled. "Some things are worth the risk." She left them then, returning to her ship to prepare for her next mission. Another system, another ancient conflict, another chance to help beings choose a better path. It was difficult work, often frustrating, sometimes dangerous. But Sarah believed in it with all her heart. Humanity had learned its lessons through thousands of years of struggle. They had nearly destroyed themselves more times than they liked to remember, but they had survived, and more than that, they had thrived. not by conquering others, but by cooperating with them, by finding common ground with beings who seemed impossibly different. If humans could do it, Sarah believed anyone could. It just took time, patience, and the willingness to try something new. The Keithrani and Voreth had proven that today. Tomorrow, perhaps others would follow. The galaxy was vast and full of conflict, but it was also full of possibility. And as long as there were beings willing to reach across the divide, to choose understanding over fear, there was hope. Humanity had dedicated itself to nurturing that hope wherever it could be found. Sarah set course for her next destination and began reviewing the files on her new assignment. Two species she had never heard of, fighting over resources on the edge of explored space. The conflict was only 50 years old, young compared to the Keithrani-Voreth War. Perhaps it would be easier to resolve, perhaps not. Either way, she would try. That was what humans did, they tried. The treaty held. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but it held. 3 years after the signing, the former enemies had established regular diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and even joint scientific expeditions. Ships bearing both Keithrani and Voreth crew members explored regions of space that neither species could have reached alone. Captain Xylax, now Admiral Xylax after his promotion, commanded the first mixed fleet. It was a symbol of how far things had come. His second-in-command was a Voreth officer named Kelrath, who had initially despised serving under a Keithrani but had grown to respect him. "We have received a message from the human ambassador," Kelrath reported one day. "She requests our assistance." Xylax looked up from his console. "Ambassador Chen, what does she need?" "There is a conflict in a nearby system. Two species we have not encountered before. She believes our experience might be valuable in helping resolve it." The irony was not lost on Xylax. Once the symbol of endless war, now being asked to help end someone else's conflict. The galaxy had a strange sense of humor. "Set course for her coordinates," he ordered. "It seems we have a new role to play." When they arrived, Sarah Chen greeted them warmly. She had aged in the years since they first met, but her eyes still held the same determination and hope. "Thank you for coming," she said. "The Trilaxians and Vendari have been fighting for 3 generations. Their war is smaller than yours was, but just as bitter. They have agreed to talk, but they need to see that peace is possible. Your presence here could make all the difference." Xylax and Threll, who had also been requested and had arrived on a separate ship, exchanged looks. The Voreth commander had become an unexpected ally over the years, almost a friend, though neither would admit it openly. "We will do what we can," Threll said, "though I am not sure we are the best examples of peaceful beings." Sarah smiled. "You are the best possible example. You show that even the deepest hatred can be overcome, that enemies can become partners. That is exactly what the Trilaxians and Vendari need to see." The negotiations were difficult, as all such negotiations were. The Trilaxians were suspicious and angry. The Vendari were defensive and proud. Both sides had long lists of grievances and demands. Both believed they were completely in the right. But Xylax and Threll spoke to them not as neutral observers, but as beings who had lived through the same cycle of hatred. They described the pain they had caused and suffered. They admitted their own mistakes and prejudices. They showed that change was possible, even when it seemed impossible. "I once believed all Voreth were monsters," Xylax told the assembled delegates. "I was taught this from birth. It was the foundation of my identity. Learning that it was wrong was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the most important." "We are not asking you to forgive what has been done," Threll added. "Forgiveness may come later, or it may never come. We are only asking you to consider a different future, one where your children do not inherit your hatred." The Trilaxian leader, a being of shifting colors and complex expressions, was the first to respond. "How do we know this is not a trick? How do we trust beings who have been our enemies for so long? You cannot know for certain, Sarah said. Trust has to be built over time through small actions that prove intentions. Start with something small, a ceasefire, an exchange of information. See how it goes. You can always return to war if peace fails, but you cannot return to peace if you never try. It took weeks of patient work, but eventually a ceasefire was agreed. It was fragile and uncertain, just as the HFY Voreth ceasefire had been, but it was a beginning. As Xylax and Threll prepared to return to their own territories, Sarah took a moment to thank them privately. "You have helped more than you know," she said. "Your willingness to share your story gave them hope. It showed them that their situation is not unique, that others have walked this path before them." "It is strange," Xylax admitted. "For so long I defined myself by the war. I was a warrior. I knew who I was and what I had to do. This new role feels uncertain." "Growth is always uncertain," Sarah replied. "But you are still a warrior. You are just fighting for something different now, for peace instead of victory, for cooperation instead of conquest." Threll nodded slowly. "The human is wise. She has a way of seeing things that we cannot see for ourselves." "Humans are not wiser than other species," Sarah said. "We have just made more mistakes and had more time to learn from them. Our history is full of terrible wars and atrocities. We came very close to ending ourselves more than once, but we survived and we learned. Now we try to share those lessons with others." "Why?" Xylax asked. "What does humanity gain from helping species you have never met resolve conflicts that do not affect you?" It was a question Sarah had been asked many times. The answer was both simple and complex. "Because we believe that all intelligent life has value. Because we know that cooperation leads to greater advancement than conflict. Because helping others ultimately helps everyone, including ourselves. And because it is the right thing to do." She paused, looking out at the stars. "There is also something else. Humanity spent so long alone, thinking we were the only intelligent species in the universe. When we discovered we were not alone, when we met other civilizations, we realized that the galaxy is full of potential. Species working together could accomplish things that would be impossible alone. We could explore every corner of the universe, solve problems that have plagued beings for millennia, create something truly magnificent. But that potential is being wasted on conflict. So much energy and intelligence spent on destruction instead of creation. When we help end wars, we are not just saving lives. We are freeing potential. Every scientist who no longer has to build weapons can work on something that benefits everyone. Every soldier who no longer has to fight can contribute to society in other ways. Every resource that no longer goes to war can be used for exploration, research, art, and joy." Xylax considered this for a long moment. "Your species thinks in very long terms. We have learned to. Short-term thinking nearly destroyed us. Now we try to consider the consequences of our actions across generations. It is not easy and we do not always succeed, but we try." Months later, the Trilaxian Vendari peace treaty was signed. Like the HFY Voreth treaty before it, it was imperfect and fragile, but it held. And as word spread of these diplomatic successes, other species began to take notice. A delegation from the HFY Voreth Alliance, as it was now officially known, traveled to Earth to formally thank humanity for their assistance. Xylax and Threll led the delegation together, a living symbol of what had been accomplished. Earth was nothing like either of them had expected. The blue planet was beautiful and diverse, covered in oceans and forests and cities that spread across every continent. The humans they met were varied in appearance and culture, yet unified in purpose. They were taken to the United Earth Council, where the human leaders welcomed them warmly. But the most meaningful moment came not in the grand halls of government, but in a simple garden on the outskirts of the capital city. There, they met elderly humans who had lived through the last great war on Earth, generations ago. Men and women who remembered a time when humanity was divided, when nations fought each other for resources and ideology. They shared their stories of loss and reconciliation, of enemies who became friends, of a world that learned to work together. It was not easy, one old man said, his weathered face marked by years of life. We lost so much. Sometimes I still dream of the people who died, but my grandchildren live in a world without war between humans. They cannot imagine it any other way. That is the real victory, not defeating the enemy but creating a future where enemies become partners. Xilax found himself moved in ways he had not expected. He realized that humanity's success was not due to some special quality or superior technology. It was simply the result of choices made over and over again by ordinary beings who decided to try something different. We could have destroyed ourselves, a human official admitted later. There were moments when it seemed inevitable, but enough people chose peace, and that made all the difference. Now we hope to help others make that same choice. When Xilax and Threll returned home, they brought more than diplomatic agreements. They brought a new understanding of what was possible and a commitment to spread that understanding to others. The Keith-Rani-Vorath Alliance began its own program of peaceful intervention, modeled on what humanity had done for them. They reached out to other species trapped in cycles of violence, offering assistance and sharing their own experiences. Not everyone accepted help. Some conflicts were too deep or too young to resolve, but many did, and slowly the galaxy began to change. Sarah Chen continued her work until she was too old to travel. By then, a new generation of human ambassadors had taken up the cause, trained by her and inspired by her example. They spread across the galaxy, carrying the message of cooperation and hope. When Sarah died, she was honored not only by humanity but by dozens of species she had helped. Memorials were built on Keith-Rani and Vorath worlds, on Trilaxian planets and Vendari stations. She became a symbol of what one person could accomplish through patience, wisdom, and unwavering belief in the potential of others. But perhaps the greatest tribute came in a simple statement from Admiral Xilax, now elderly himself, at a ceremony marking the 20th anniversary of the peace treaty. "I was taught to hate from the day I was born," he said. "I believed that hatred was necessary, that it defined who I was. A human showed me that I was wrong. She did not force me to change. She simply showed me another way and trusted me to choose it. That trust changed everything." He looked out at the crowd, a mixture of Keith-Rani, Vorath, humans, and representatives of a dozen other species. Today, our children learn a different story. They learn that the galaxy is full of potential friends, not enemies. They learn that cooperation achieves more than conflict. They learn to see the universe not as a battlefield but as a home we share with countless others. This is Ambassador Chen's legacy. Not the treaties she helped negotiate or the wars she helped end, but the change in how we see each other. She believed that intelligent beings, given the chance, would choose to be better than their history. She was right. The applause that followed was thunderous, a sound that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. Keith-Rani and Vorath standing side by side, celebrating peace instead of preparing for war. Humanity had not saved them. They had saved themselves. But humanity had shown them it was possible, had provided the tools and support and patient belief that made the difference. That was the human gift to the galaxy. Not technology or military power, but the simple, profound lesson that peace was always an option, that enemies could become allies, that the future did not have to be determined by the past. And slowly, one conflict at a time, one choice at a time, the galaxy was learning that lesson. The wars would not end overnight. They might never end completely. But the direction had changed. Instead of spiraling toward destruction, intelligent life was reaching toward cooperation, toward something better. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for. Not perfection, not utopia, but progress. The willingness to try, the courage to believe, the patience to wait for change that might take generations. Humanity, fuck yeah, they whispered among themselves and shouted to the stars. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they kept trying, kept believing, kept reaching out to others even when it seemed hopeless. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.